We are in Genesis chapter 9. Genesis chapter 9, we'll start in verse 18. We have been discussing the flood, and we have gotten through the flood, and now we're on the other side, this side of the flood, and it's an entirely new world, and it's got to be repopulated. And actually, there's a lot of things to be said concerning world populations, and we're going to be talking about that because Genesis chapter 10 does talk about it. And in Genesis chapter 10 is going to talk about it's going to be the genealogy coming from Shem, Ham, and Japheth, but it's going to be going much further than you may think. In that Genesis chapter 11 is going to tell us how everyone spread, but Genesis chapter 10 actually with the genealogy there tells us where they spread to, or we have a good idea where they spread to, because these are very ancient names of peoples. And it's an extraordinary study. But before we get to that, let's read the end of chapter 9. And this is just an event that occurs. And one may think this is kind of a random event. Did this really need to be put into the biblical text? But it does have to do with Canaan. And specifically because of Canaan. Because guess who's going to be the descendants of Canaan? Just put the word ites, add the word ites to Canaan. You have the Canaanites. Canaanites are going to be the descendants of Canaan. And, and of course, that's not going to come into play until centuries later, where you have these descendants of Noah. Of course, you have Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These descendants are going to be spreading out and forming peoples and nations. They're going to be divided by their families, by their languages. And they won't be divided until we get to chapter 11, but chapter 10 gives us kind of an overview, just going through the genealogy. But let's go to Genesis 9 and verse 18. Now the sons of Noah went out of the ark. The sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham was the father of Canaan. It's prefacing this. It's putting this down because it's going to concern him. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. And Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. All right. Noah goes to farming. How many years is it from getting off the ark to where this occurs? Well, I think we can safely assume it's got to be several years because you can't plant a vineyard. And a vineyard is not exactly like a wheat field where you plant it in the winter and you harvest it in the summer. It's not like that. A vineyard takes time. It actually takes several years for it to grow and then begin to produce any fruit. But he began to be a farmer and he planted a vineyard. And just because Noah does what he does doesn't mean that it's approved. Matter of fact, none of this appears to be approved at all. But the Bible shows it's the people inside it. For who they actually are. It doesn't hide anything from us, as it has been said, warts and all. And that's an old saying, centuries old actually. Now verse 21, then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. So we can see some things just from this. One is he becomes a farmer, plants a vineyard. They're living in tents at this time. And he has created wine from this, and he's drunk from it. Now Ham, verse 22, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Now, we can also know from this that this has got to be several years, because coming immediately off the ark, one, you can't have a vineyard. Number two, Canaan won't be born for a while. Canaan is going to be coming around, and we'll see that. Matter of fact, Canaan is not the first to be born after the flood. That's Arphaxad. And there is a word, and I had never heard of it before until most recently. It's the Arphaxidian time, or the Arphaxidian age. And it's the age between the flood and Babel. And before, well, the flood up to the dispersion of Babel. And it's named after Arphaxad, who's the firstborn after the flood. But let's continue on. Verse 22, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, that would be Noah, and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So Noah awoke from his wine and knew that his younger son, what his younger son had done. Now, Shem, Ham, Japheth. We don't know necessarily the order of birth, except we do know that Japheth is the older one. We know that from the end of chapter 10. Japheth was the eldest of the son. The order that we usually put it, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, is the way it begins that way, as a matter of fact. When we go to chapter 5 and the end of 6, well, actually, no, I'm wrong. It's Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That's right. The order that's given there is Shem, Ham, and Japheth, but we find that Japheth is the older. Why isn't Japheth put first in these usual, when the naming of the three sons? And my only response to that is because Shem is where the line of the Christ will come. Shem, where we get the word Shemite or Semite, that from Shem eventually is going to be Abraham, and from Abraham eventually will be the 12 tribes of Israel, and from Israel eventually will be the Christ. And so Shem plays an important role in this. Now, Japheth and Ham also play an important role in the populating of humanity, populating of the world. But Shem, don't ever think that Shem only came the Jews. That would not be right. You have actually the entire Arabic world coming through Abraham. And Genesis chapter 10 and chapter 11, there is no Arabic world. And that's one of the things we need to understand, that people, it is very, very difficult to study. Well, actually it's not. But if you have certain things set in your mind, the world and world populations won't exactly work out the way you think they should. Because there's a mixing of people, and there are peoples that come up from some other century, and while they have obviously an ancestry that goes back to Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they are a peculiar people that may have some unique attribute that is not necessarily seen widely in other places. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a bit. Now, Noah, verse 24, so Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done. Then he said, now, why does Noah say what he's about to do? He's angry, but he does it. And I'm not saying that it was the thing to do, but he does it. And should he have done this? I don't know. But it does have an effect. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants. He shall be to his brethren. And he said, blessed be the Lord. Right? Blessed be Jehovah, the God of Shem. And may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years, so all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. All right, this is Noah's curse on his grandson, Canaan. Why? The only answer I have for that is by way of providence, that Canaan, who is the son of Ham, from Canaan will be the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Girgashites. They're all going to be coming from Canaan. And they're going to be the ones occupying the Palestine, or Canaan, for a long, long time until, well, actually, after Joshua comes in with Israel, they're still living there because Israel refused to kick them all out or exterminate them as they were told to do by command of God. Okay, now we go to chapter 10. And chapter 10 is, we're going to start with Japheth, and there's only 3 verses concerning the descendants of Japheth. But I want you, and I've got maps here, and I want you to see how they spread, how everybody spreads, and it is from Babel. But okay, you may be wondering, all right, the flood, as we have been saying, 1,656, and this is AM, that's Anno Mundi, which means the year of the world. From the beginning of the world, 1,656 years, we have the flood. And the flood lasted for a year, and we see the flood beginning in Genesis chapter 6. Well, the events leading up to the flood. We also have Babel. Babel is perhaps, and this is a perhaps, 200 years later. After we have the flood and the ark resting in the mountains of Ararat and coming out of Ararat, perhaps 200 years later we get to Genesis 11. Perhaps. It may have been a little bit longer. It may have been a little bit less. There's no way to really pin it down. But I saw a geneticist talking about this very subject, and that the world population could go from 8 to really a city in a matter of 200 years. And it would be easy. When you have a population rate have been as high as 8%, like every so many years, it would double and then double again and double again and double again and double again. The population of the world, by the time we get to Babel, could have been several thousand people to have started a city. And at that time, when we get to Babel, pretty much everyone's together. There would be smatterings out, such as we never see that Noah was ever at Babel. We see him where he's already a farmer. Or where was that farm? Don't know, but I rather doubt he would have left his farm that he established and go to Babel. I rather doubt it. And we don't hear of Shem, Ham, or Japheth either. They clearly are alive when this occurred. We don't see them there either. So there would be smatterings of other settlements, other peoples, but Babel is the big one. Babel is the one they wanted to make the city. You might think of city number one. Number one, this side of the flood. There would have been plenty of cities prior to the flood. But this would be city number one after the flood. Now, we go to, do this, Genesis chapter 10, we have the genealogy, and this is the spread of mankind after Babel. We see this. At the end of Genesis 10, I want to bring these verses out because we can have the idea that everything that happens in Genesis 10 is before anything that happens in Genesis 11, and it's not true. Okay? Not everything that occurred in Genesis 10 happens before Genesis 11, because we have these words at the end of Genesis 10. These were the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, according to their nations. families, languages, lands, nations. Okay, there was only one language prior to Babel. So this happens after Babel. And these were the families of the sons of Noah according to their generations in their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. So here we have the population of the ark, Noah, then you have Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their wives. This represents the population of the earth when the ark rests in the mountains of Ararat. But from these, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, we have all of the population of the earth. Obviously from Noah and his wife, but Noah and his wife do not have any more children. After Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they don't have any more. This is the number of their children from which all the population of the earth is going to be. Now, we need to have a discussion here for a moment, and we're not going to get through this today. I rather doubt it. But nothing about the population of the world works in a nice and tidy way. What do I mean by that? I mean that there are few nations where it can be said this is purely the people of Japheth, or purely the people of Ham or of Shem. That's not the way, because world populations mix. And if you've ever done like a world history, you will see where there are migrations all the time. It wasn't just from Babel. It was from Babel. But there are going to be migrations all the time. Matter of fact, happening today. Today is not the first time it's ever happened. Colonialism isn't the first time it ever happened. There's been empires that have spread, such as Romania. Romania is primarily populated by, but not solely populated, but affected by Roman soldiers who settled there. All right? There was a local population already in Romania, but you have Roman soldiers that populated there. You have sections, and you're not going to believe me, but it is true. There are sections in places such as Switzerland that have elements of Mongolian in them because of raids coming out of Asia in the days of Rome, coming out of Asia and right on into Europe. And there are some soldiers that stayed there, had families. Okay? There are always peoples who migrate for one reason or another. Things might have gone very badly where they were. Famine, you'll move. If there's no food, you'll move. Things got too cold, or things got too hot, or there was a blight, there is a drought. You move. All right? It could also be that someone's invaded your land and you move. You either merge with them, which does happen, or you can move, which also happens. You have peoples that through time kind of bounce around, and usually we think of like Saxons as being in England only, but they're not. There's a part of Germany that was known as Saxony. That you have all these peoples that migrate and they mix. And if you've ever done a DNA test, you need to know straight up that the likelihood that you are 100% one thing is extremely slim, and here's the next news, you don't want that either. Because that means that you may very well be in a genetic dead end, okay? And that there can be problems associated with that. It doesn't just pick any nationality you want, anything that you want. And it is best physically if the more of a mutt you are, and I claim being a mutt, okay, that, and if you've, and you can see it in dogs, like these thoroughbred horses or thoroughbred dogs, that they do have certain problems with them. Like this breed always has kidney problems. I got to take care of that. Hip problems, teeth problems, whatever it is. Okay, and it's best if you have an intermixing of people. It is extremely good and healthy if that were to happen, and it has been happening. There is this continual mixing of people that has gone on from the beginning. And at Babel, if we could just step into Babel the way it was in that day, we would have seen a wide array of human attributes right there. Not with everybody, because there would have been, at that point, not so much of a separation of human attributes as will come as people grow miles and miles away from each other, and things will begin to be seen and dominate in those areas. But few nations are made up of one son, and we can say, well, we've already said it. No one nation can you say, yeah, that's just the sons of Ham, or that's just the sons of Shem or Japheth, because there is, even among the Jews, even in the line of the Christ, you have Ruth and you have Rahab. All right? They're not direct descendants of Abraham. But let's look at this, and this is the truth. The way races are usually seen is divided up in three sections: Negroid, Mongoloid, Caucasoid. But here's the problem. You cannot look at these three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and say, oh, well, this is where all the Caucasoids came from. This is where all the Mongoloids came from. This is where all the Negroids came from. You can't say that, because it is surprising where these folks went and what attributes they took with them. It is very surprising. You cannot say that. And like I've been saying, there is a mix. Matter of fact, with the study of races, there's too many problems fraught. Too many problems that are there. What kind of problems? That one attribute you may see in one, well, you may see it in at least one more, or in the other two, or something. There are always these shared traits that are there. And usually what we're going on when we separate the races is visuals only. That's it. Just visuals only. Without realizing, well, let's just cut right down to it. There is just one race. It's humanity. And really, it shouldn't even be called a race. It's just humanity. That's it. And we have a wide array of physical attributes, which is good, because that means the genetic code was strong. The more attributes they are, the stronger the genetic code happens to be. And the stronger the genetic code happens to be, the longer humanity can go in time physically and continue to go in time. Now, having said that, once again, I was watching a geneticist, and he was talking about that very thing. And he was saying that the human genome cannot go 1,000,000 years. It's not that strong. Now, it's strong, but it's not that strong. It can't go 1,000,000 years. It can go thousands of years, but it can't go 1,000,000 years. And he said, well, if it can't go 1,000,000 years, then we can't have been around that long. We can't. And with mutations like evolutionists always have mutations as their hero. Time, chance, going into chance mutations are the hero. Mutations are the problem. Mutations aren't the solution. Mutations are the problem. There's a reason why we can't go 1,000,000 years with the human genome, is because of mutations. Because that occurs. And it does occur naturally. But there's nothing, it's not like the X-Men, of where you now have this amazing ability that is to your benefit, that you have this power. It's never like that. Mutations are like 99.999% to your detriment, one way or another. It may not be serious, but to your detriment. And the other percent is neutral. It neither helps nor harms. There is no point of mutation where you actually are helped by it. Truly helped. But let's move on. All right, so here's our map of the Mideast, and I've just put in countries there. And we want to talk about this. We have the mountains of Ararat over to the east side of what is modern-day Turkey. Somewhere in there, the ark came to rest. Exactly where, I have no idea. All right, there's no way to know. And we mentioned this not too long ago, but for those who are searching Mount Ararat to find the ark, it doesn't say, the biblical text does not say it landed on Mount Ararat. It said the mountains of Ararat. So it landed somewhere in there. Now, we have going from Genesis 8, verse 4, where the ark lands, to Genesis 11, verse 2, for Babel, in this settlement in the land of Shinar, they actually do take an eastward arc, the population, and like I said, it could have taken 200 years to do this. There's no real knowing exactly how long it took, simply because the lives are too long. If people had a lifespan like we do, we would have a better guess, and we would know, okay, this person would only live, we'll give them 80 years, all right? And since he happens to be a grandson or a great-grandson of Noah, then we would know, okay, so many years, and he would be a capable adult to do these sorts of things. But once he got to a certain age, he wouldn't be capable of doing this anymore. But we have this migration that heads toward, well, really heads kind of southeast and then back toward the west to the plain of in the land of Shinar. Now, here's our world, and we're going to zoom in a little bit so we can do this a little bit better. And we're going to begin chapter 10 in the order in which chapter 10 begins. And while we do usually have the names of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Japheth is first on this list. One, Japheth only has, I think 3 verses. Yeah, 3 verses. It not that many sons or grandsons mentioned, but Japheth is the oldest. And at the end of chapter 10, we see, no, not at the end of chapter 10. But we do see it in chapter 10. I think it's once we get to talking about Shem that we see that Japheth is called Japheth the elder. But now, yeah, okay, 10:21. That's where it is. Okay, so Japheth is covered from in chapter 10, verses 2 to 5. Now understand, the descendants of Japheth are here to let us see how world population spread. Same thing with Ham, but Ham is more than that. Ham, you have the Canaanites with Ham. There's going to be a spread of population, but there's going to be the Canaanites. The Canaanites are going to play a big role in, of course, the Old Testament. And with these of Japheth, they're going to be involved, but not as much as the Canaanites. All right, not near as much. But we'll see. And we're going to see some of the ways that this is done. Okay, so you will notice we have Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tiras. I have underlined Gomer and Javan for a reason. Gomer and Javan, because, and I've actually bolded them, because we're going to be getting in the next verse of Gomer's descendants and then go to Javan's descendants. But Magog, and yes, that would be the name of Gog and Magog that we see in the book of Genesis. Gog is not in the book of Genesis. Gog and Magog in the book of Revelation. Magog being a people, and a people that would be in Central Asia, or that area, what we might call Eurasia, but it would be the where you have a lot of flat land, and called the Asian steppe, that where there was a lot of horsemen in there. But Magog was in Central Asia. Madai, this is where the Medes come from, as in the Medes and the Persians. The Medes would also have gone off to the east. Magog gone off to the east. Madai, the family, I should say, of Magog. Madai going off to the east. Javan is the ancient names for the Greeks. The Greek had a very, very ancient names, and Javan is one of those names. Tubal is basically the Slavic people that are going to be in Eastern Europe and in Russia. Meshech is actually, you have a king who has that same name, and Moscow is named after him. Of course, given time, names change. Tyrus is the Etruscans. You have then Gomer. He has 3 sons. Ashkenaz, the Armenians. Riphath, the Georgians. Togarmah, of Azerbaijan. But understand, we have a mixing of peoples always. Always. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. You're always going to have the Romeo and Juliet. Okay, 2 battling families, they fall in love with each other, despite the families. All right, you're always going to have a Romeo and Juliet. You're always going to have a people that settle nearby and are absorbed. And there's always going to be a prominent group that become very attractive. A prominent group because they have cities, they're well established, they have shipping, they have goods and services. Well, if they'll let you, you'll move in, okay? Because that's good business. Just like with a Lot going into Sodom, which is a bad example, by the way, but just like with a Lot and a Sodom going to Sodom, well, he wasn't from Sodom, but it was good business, and so that's where he went. There's always going to be an influx of people from all over. That just happens. And you can't predict people. They're just going to do what they are going to do. And like with these genetic tests, which it's fun, but it doesn't give you things accurate necessarily, because they're always changing them, and they're doing, I guess, the best they can do. And it's fun more than anything else, I suppose. That's correct.
So it's not about
yes.
like with the Mongolian coming in and going through Europe, and then their genetic information getting dispersed in, and then various peoples from Africa and vice versa, like all these different directions. So it's like it's with the assumption that Asians are only in Asia, and Europeans are only in Europe.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
That's why it's all mixed.
And we can see just by places like England invaded by the Normans, invaded by the Vikings, and both of them came to stay. The Normans ruled, and the Vikings coming in, Both came to stay. In earlier peoples coming in there, the earliest, I have no idea who the earliest were, but the Saxons would have come in their time. The Angles would have come in their time. You would have had all these, the Cornish, the Welsh, the Scottish. They would have come in their time and probably mixed. And of course today you've got a whole lot of mixture that was going on before we get to the 20th century, and before, as a matter of fact, before we even get to the 15th century, there is an enormous mixing of a place like England, and there are places such as in Japan where you have what we typically refer to as the Japanese people, but there is a more ancient people that were there called the Ainu, which don't really look like your typical Japanese person. They've been there when the modern Japanese came into Japan, they found the Ainu living there, and the Ainu still live there today. They would be what we would call indigenous people. But they don't look like the Japanese. Matter of fact, to look at them, you would say, he looks Russian, is what you'd, big beards and kind of stout fellows. But anyway, okay, so here we have Gomer and the three sons given here. Now we have Javan, we have Elisha, Cyprus, Tarshish is Spain and Portugal. It seems like Javan, the sons of Javan, went to the Mediterranean, is where they went. Whereas we go back to Gomer, they kind of went off into the northeast. And with this also, the Slavic people more toward the north, though Etruscans, don't think they were as far north as all that. But we have Cyprus, Spain, Portugal with Tarshish, and Tarshish is a son of Javan. Tarshish is the ancient name of Spain. Such as when we get to the book of Jonah, Jonah boards a ship. Where's that ship headed? It's going to Tarshish. All right, because there was trade that went on between, all across the Mediterranean. All across it there was trade. There was shipping that went on. So there was something that went from the Phoenicians in Tyre and Sidon, and that they would ship to Spain, and they'd get something from Spain and bring it back. All of these countries would have had different resources and different things that they would have that others wouldn't necessarily have, such as the mining of tin, or the mining of silver, the mining of gold, or sheep, or honey, or we just make a better kind of whatever it is than others do, because we just happen to have a better quality animal maybe for that particular product, but or a better environment. We get more rain, so this particular crop just tastes better, whatever it is. But Tarshish, Kittim would be Crete, Dodanim is Rhodes, all of these across the Mediterranean. And so in this we see basically where the descendants of Ham went from chapter 10. That's not to say this is where they went and stayed. It doesn't mean that at all. Because as we have said before, if the ark had landed somewhere else, let's say right here, or better yet, right here, there's only one place to go, and that's pretty much to the east. Or in Spain, only one place to go, and unless you cross the water there, you're going to have to, it's going to be a long walk getting over here. But not to say they couldn't make boats, which I have no doubt that they could make boats and ships in the day.
They already made one big one.
They made a big one. Yep. The concept was there. And that would have been, in the discussions of this, you would have had 8 people who would have known firsthand what the world was like prior to the flood. And prior to the flood, there would have been technologies there, such as building ships. I have no doubt that the people prior to the flood made boats or ships or things like that. It's just that the ark was made to withstand that flood. All right, another boat or ship could have withstood a flood, but not that flood. And there would have been other things that you have Noah, his sons, all their wives. They would have had a knowledge that came from the other side of the flood. Of this is the way things were done then. And this would have been passed on. Now, some things naturally would get lost, just lost in time. Because if you don't write it down, or someone just has no interest in it whatsoever, you're just boring me to death. What do I care about, which a child can do? What do I care about that? Until, mom and dad are gone and you think, wow, I wish I could ask that question now. How were they doing that? I do not know. But here we see just from Genesis chapter 10, the direction that the children of Japheth went after Babel. Now let's go to Ham. Ham is a big group. Ham, matter of fact, is the biggest group there is. And you have from verses 6 to 20. But you have here at the beginning, Cush, Mizraim, Put, Canaan. Now, Canaan, we already have discussed that. Canaan we've got. But Cush is the ancient name of Ethiopia. That's the ancient name. And we will see who exactly. Well, we can just see some things here in just a second. Seba went to Ethiopia, and the ancient name is Cush. Havilah is also in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a big place, and some of these countries are big, okay, such as India. India is a subcontinent, and you can have many people heading to India. And don't think that the Indian people are, just they all came from the same. Well, we all came from the same source. I can't say that. We all came from the same source. But that you have these various peoples that do come into India. Persians would go into India and settle there. Greeks going into India, conquering it and settling there. You have all kinds of people with influx and whatnot. But Havilah is talked about in Genesis chapter 2, 11 and 12, and that is the place that had, the gold there was good. And it would be my idea that you might want to go gold mining in that area, but somehow I have a feeling that maybe the people before the flood already mined it. I don't know. It's just my having fun. But Sabta, Rayama, Sabdacha head off to India. And now, I realize that there can be scholars who will disagree in certain points, such as Havilah, because Havilah is, we've got a descendant of Shem who has the same name. And so anyway, there can be some disagreements, but this seems to be coming from very ancient names and where they most likely would have gone in all this, because in some cases we do know precisely where they went. We have Sheba, that's also Ethiopia. Dedan is southern Arabia, and this is actually history. Then we get to Nimrod. Nimrod is the 6th son of Cush mentioned. Nimrod is not mentioned in that first grouping of such here. These are the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, Canaan. But then we come back to Cush, and here's his 6th son, and it's Nimrod. Nimrod is that mighty hunter. And we have from him Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar, Assyria, Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calneh, Rezin. All right, now this is not speculation because this is directly out of the verse. And we have Babel would have been, is the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Or well, let's just read it directly. Verse 10. So chapter 10, verse 10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. So with Nineveh, not Nineveh, but with Nimrod, Babel did not exist until Nimrod. Nimrod established Babel. Was it his idea to build the tower? I don't know. It could have been somebody else. It could have been a son. It could have been a nephew. It could have been, anybody. I don't know. But he is let's just face it, Nimrod is the beginning of building cities this side of the flood. And as we called Babel city number one, it truly is city number one this side of the flood. And he was, it says the beginning of his kingdom was, which means he's king. You don't say that was the beginning of his kingdom, and he was never king. Well, okay, you got your wording wrong there. No, Nimrod had to be king, and it started with Babel. Well, why doesn't he stay in Babel? Why all these other places, especially a place like Nineveh and entirely other people, Assyria, why doesn't he stay in Babel? And actually we studied this, it's been a number of weeks ago, and we're out of time, is that no one stayed in Babel. According to archaeological evidence, once we get to the dispersion out of Babel, no one stayed there. And it remained empty according to archaeology, not according to the Bible, but according to archaeology. Nineveh remained vacant for a couple of hundred years or so. And that it was a place, I guess, best left aside. It seems like in my mind that, okay, if everybody else is leaving, I'm staying. Okay, you guys go on, we're good. Okay, but evidently that didn't happen. Evidently everybody left and spread all over. But okay, we have got to continue next week. We are out of time. I wasn't even paying attention. And thank you very much, everybody.